Stanford University. We have Dr. Keith Devlin with us tonight, who is an international scholar and an innovator in mathematics education, really helping students globally find new ways to understand mathematics concepts. So I think technically he is the director, co-founder and director of the H-STAR Institute at Stanford, Human Sciences Technology Advanced Research. So that's what that is. But when he gets up here and starts to speak, you'll probably recognize him as the voice behind the math guy on NPR. So with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Keith Devlin to the stage to talk to us about his research.
Okay, thank you. I often get invited to go and give talks at schools and colleges, but this is kind of unusual. This is clearly a very special event in a very special school, so I'm truly honored to have been chosen as the speaker for this evening. There are two books that I think every parent and, well, there are many books that I think every parent and every teacher should read, but the two I want to concentrate on tonight are these two books. Well, first of all, let me just, before I do that, I did want to make a point. That I'm a mathematician, so you're expecting me to give a talk that's related to mathematics. And I am indeed going to pitch my talk about mathematics education, but by the time I get to the end of my 15 minutes, when my 15 minutes are up, as they say, I have hoped to have convinced you that the word mathematics is irrelevant, because I'm really talking about education. And indeed, I'm picking up, I think, on what a couple of people have already said. I think one of the things that we need to be doing in good education is forget all of these different names that separate the disciplines, because it's really about one thing. It's about educating a human being. Okay, the two books that I jumped ahead to were Thomas Friedman's book, The World is Flat, a few years old now, although it's had several upgrades, and then The 4-Hour Work Week by Timothy Ferriss. Both are about the kind of society that we have created for ourselves, essentially using the internet and rapid communications and rapid transportation systems, where we've literally flattened everything and the economy has become global. And that's changed a number of things. For example, when my parents were coming through the school system in the 30s, if you were good at arithmetic, that was a marketable skill. By the time I was coming through the high school system in England in the 1960s, the early 1960s, being good in arithmetic was just finishing to be a marketable skill. Desktop calculators were coming along. Eventually, or very fairly rapidly, they were followed by pocket calculators, hand calculators, and then computers and personal computers. And that made doing arithmetic was still a valuable thing to have, but it was certainly not a marketable skill. It was something you could buy and put in your pockets for $10. However, at the time I was coming through the school system, if you were good at algebra and other parts of mathematics, that was a marketable skill. But it's not now. Technology has taken away a lot of it. Pretty well any piece of mathematics that you would want to solve if you're in industry or business, you can buy a computer program or a machine that can do it for you. You can download an app that will do that mathematics for you and do it pretty well. Now, sometimes controlling the machine requires some mathematical ability, but that can be outsourced. You can outsource mathematics just as easily as you can outsource computer programming. And it's one of the fastest things to outsource. If I was running a large company in this country and I needed some people to solve equations, it makes no sense for me to hire an expensive person to do it. When 5 o'clock rolls round, I send that set of equations over to India or China, and then when I come into the office the next day, they've been solved by small teams of people. You can outsource everything that made my career possible can now be outsourced. It's no longer a unique marketable skill. Bearing that in mind, I want to ask the question now, well, what should we be teaching? And initially, remember, I'm talking about mathematics, but it's going to generalize. What do we mean by a world-class education system? One of the ways that politicians love to measure it is how we stand in the rankings. This is the Olympics approach. How many gold medals do we have? And if we start to take that measure, we don't do too well. in fact, most of our industrial competitors not only rank above us, we're sort of high in terms of numbers, but just look at the lengths of the lines with the countries like Singapore and China and so forth that are there. So we don't do too well if we measure these international comparisons, which are based on taking various kinds of tests. We could decide to measure the effectiveness of our education system by the per capita GDP of the country. That reflects to some extent the educational system. And there we do sort of okay, but we're certainly not the leader. And again, some of our competing companies are sort of floating around in the same ballpark. But it's okay. It's not great, but it's okay. Another thing we could measure is innovation. And there are various ways of measuring it. There's one that measures the overall Global Innovation Index, and there we do pretty well. We rank 9th, and the numbers are actually not too far ahead of the leaders. So we clearly are doing something right in terms of innovation. If you measure something more specific, like the innovation output, the performance, then we find ourselves at number 5. So it's when you start talking about thinking outside the box, innovation, that's where the United States begins to look okay, at least as a nation. Okay. And I'm going to take this as my starting point. I don't see any future for the United States other than staying ahead of the innovation game. At Stanford, my institute, we do research with a lot of companies from around the world, a lot of governments from around the world. And the groups we work with most closely are the ones that are ahead of the innovation game. That, I think, is going to be our future. I don't see any other alternative. So what does that mean in terms of mathematics? Well, mathematics over the centuries has always developed in response to society's needs. Numbers actually arose about 10,000 years ago. Numbers and arithmetic arose because of money. It was basically a way of keeping track of people's possessions and their worth. So the first use of numbers was money. In fact, it was money. Okay. In terms of Western Europe, modern finance, banking, accounting, double-entry bookkeeping, international trading conglomerations, all of that came out of Italy, in particular Pisa and Florence, in the 13th century. And why did it come out of there? Because Pisa and Florence was the place in the Western world that first got modern arithmetic, invented by the Indians in the first 6 or 7 centuries, taken up the Silk Route by the Arab-speaking traders, and then it crossed the Mediterranean at the very end of during the 13th century, the beginning of the 13th century, it crossed the Mediterranean, went into Pisa, and suddenly you've got all of modern banking and finance and insurance, all of that coming out of Pisa and then Lombardia up to Venice and then to Europe. And what was important were these 4 eons: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. It was the fact that the Italians got that first that enabled them to dominate the world in terms of finance and commerce. That was what it was. By the way, that is a page from a book in the public library in Siena, which is a 13th century manuscript. It's one of the first books in modern arithmetic published in the Western world. That dependency, or that importance of arithmetic, lasted right through until the 19th century. If you were good at arithmetic, you could be good at trade and commerce and industry. So it takes us right up through to the Industrial Revolution in the United States and in Victorian England and so forth. If you come into the 20th century, in particular towards the second and third parts of the century, this is the second third and then the final third of the 20th century, then you needed rather more. Things got a little more technological. You needed more than just arithmetic. You needed calculus, you needed algebraic techniques. And so I'm going to take the eons up to differentiation and integration. That was really, the calculus was behind a lot of 20th century technologies and industry. But very few people work in that kind of environment now. That's how people work today, especially in the United States, in the innovation nations. And then there's a couple of new eons of coming in. Communication and collaboration. And the increase in size of the fonts is meant to reflect what I regard as the increasing importance. Each one came to dominate the previous one because the previous one became capturable by technology and could be outsourced. Very hard to capture these by technology. A technology can help, but you can't really capture them, and it's very hard to outsource some of these. So we may actually be getting into an era where we can actually hang on to a lead, because really what we're talking about is the latest eon of all, innovation. And that's really what it's about. If we can't send our kids out capable of working or even living in a collaborative communication environment, then we're not doing well for them. So what do we want our education system to provide in the sense of mathematics? What I've been calling over the last 5 or 6 years, innovative mathematical thinking. That means being able to think outside the box, find and adapt existing methods and techniques for novel situations, take something you know, change it a bit and apply it into something you didn't know before, find new or approaches and methods and techniques for new problems, collaborate with others, work in multidisciplinary teams, communicate well. When I was at school, none of these were focused on in mathematics education. But that was a different era. Everything I learned can be outsourced. Must have broad sense of the scope, power, and limitations of mathematics. Good, but not necessarily stellar mathematical ability. Remember, I am a professor of mathematics, so I'm saying this with some knowledge and some humility. But faced with my skills being outsourceable, I think I need to move too. The ability to quickly master new mathematical techniques. And let me just focus on this, a broad sense of mathematics. Not necessarily stellar ability. That's the stuff you can outsource. Ability to quickly master something new. Those are the things I think are really crucial to being involved in mathematics in an innovation nation. But wait a minute. The mathematics focus has just disappeared. I'm just talking about innovative thinkers. In other words, for several thousand years, we have actually singled out mathematics, and I think with good reason. It's difficult to learn mathematics, you need to focus on it. We've singled that out as being something special. But I think those days are gone. Yes, it's important, but so is lots of other things. And you've really got to think of the whole spectrum if you want to grasp what education needs to be about. We certainly need people, and the world needs people who can do this kind of thing. That's important to have those people. For a variety of reasons, it's part of our art, our culture, human history, the people that like to do it, it's fun. That's important. But that's more important for the future of the United States. Being able to produce new ideas with bits of mathematics, bits of physics, bits of electronics, bits of human insights, a whole bunch of other stuff. And in fact, the whole spectrum of disciplines begins to look like a holistic thing that we need to develop. I'm not the only person that said things like that. This one's kind of interesting. As I was preparing this talk, or thinking about what I was going to say a few weeks ago, I looked at this fairly recent issue of Fast Company, and this is something stated by one of the people who actually runs one of these fairly high and sophisticated outsourced places in India, a place where you can ship intellectual work. And this guy laments the fact that although he can hire hundreds of people who can solve an equation in a heartbeat, he finds it almost impossible to hire people coming out of the Indian education system who can think innovatively and think outside the box. Interesting. He's not talking about the whole educational system. Well, he maybe doesn't know. Those of us that live in the United States and California know that we have a very broad range of ability, of success in our education system. But what he's latching onto is the fact that in the schools that are doing it well, we're doing it better than anybody else in the world. We're producing truly innovative thinkers. And it's latching onto that we need to do and let that spread to more and more schools. And remember, that's said by someone who's in this bogey area of where the things are being outsourced. In the United States, we celebrate success. We love success. And we see images like this all the time. I deliberately chose international images with just one American. But we celebrate success. We love to see people win. And then we should ask ourselves, what does it take to achieve that thing? Looking at the picture of someone winning doesn't tell you what it takes to do that. If you want to see what's required for success, you need to look at the picture of that individual just before the competition begins. And here's what you see. The magic ingredients for success, just look at the concentration, the focus, and the passion. It's really about those three: passion, commitment, and focus. Not just in athletics, not just in cycling or running or anything else. That's in everything. It's all about passion, commitment, and focus. If you can produce kids from the schools that have those three, game over. They're going to be fine. Athletes aren't the only people where you can see that degree of passion, commitment, and focus. There's another group of people where you'll see that. And those are children doing something they're interested in. Just watch the face of a child who's interested in what he or she is doing. Doesn't matter what it is, just look at that face. Oh my, oh my, oh my. We have world beaters in our classrooms all the time. Doesn't matter what they're doing, you look at the face of a child who likes and is interested in what they're doing. They're world beaters, they're gold medalists. One of the people who's remarked on that is the guy whose image is in the middle. And since he was a neighbor of mine, I can't help but finish with some of his words.
Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking, and don't settle.
If you haven't watched Steve Jobs' commencement address at Stanford in 2005 on YouTube, please go home and do it. It's pretty short, it's an amazing speech, and he really nails what it's about in terms of his own life, about following your passion, following your interests, encouraging your children to do that one. It all works if you do that. The children are hardwired to respond to that. That's what they love to do. And Steve Jobs actually had that absolutely right. And it doesn't matter what it's in. That's why, although it may have sounded as though I was talking about education as being a route to a career, I really wasn't. I was talking about education as being a preparation for life. And in the kind of world we have created for ourselves, the difference between career, life, other things, those are all blending away as well. We're just living a life and it all comes together. If I've inspired you or reinvigorated you or anything positive about education and you're interested in some of the ideas, there is a book that I brought out earlier this year about some of my ideas about the way mathematics education in particular should be going. But I should have made it clear, I think, that by mathematics education, I'm hoping we reach the stage where the word mathematics just fades away, has been a historical distinction that's no longer relevant. Thank you very much.